Simultaneously, on three different fronts, Russia is collapsing. Economically, we see that Ukrainian drones are doing their job. They've already wiped out more than 13% of Russia's oil refining capacity. On the social front, things aren't much better. The Kremlin now is so desperate for control that it's forced installing a surveillance app on its own citizens' phones. That app, called Max, records video, it records audio, it records location, and even records unsent keystrokes. But the best part? Experts are now warning that it's not very secure, and all the data, which it has stolen from its millions of citizens, could sometime soon begin to leak. And for the Russian military, things are not looking any better. In fact, they are losing more generals on the battlefield. And at the same time, the Russian military's conflict with FSB is turning into a hot war, no longer just a Cold War. For Russia, the situation's bad, and it's getting even worse. The regime is burning through its fuel reserves, it is bleeding out its generals, and it's too busy spying on its own citizens to be able to address either one of those problems. And every single day, Ukraine is driving that collapse ever closer. However, very rarely do we ever see that in the Western press. Instead of covering how rapidly things are spinning out of control for Moscow, too often they portray these forced peace talks as mercy for Ukraine. But that's not the case. It's for Russia that time is running out, which is why I created this channel, to get the truth about the war to more people, to expose the reality of the Putin regime. As you know, right now is a critical juncture for the history of Ukraine. Its very future is being decided. And it is absolutely incredible and absurd that a country like Russia, a country with an economy smaller than Italy's, thinks that it has the right, that has even the capacity to dictate terms to the West and to dictate what will happen to Ukraine. But that's why we need the facts on the ground, from where I am, here in Ukraine, and to discuss what really is happening in Russia. So help me get the truth to more people of what's really happening here in Ukraine and in Russia. And there's a very easy way for you to do that. Please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel and consider becoming a channel member today. And just as a quick aside, for those of you who missed it, yesterday we surpassed 200,000 subscribers, which is pretty amazing when you consider that this channel is only 3 months old. And I know very well that you're not here for me. You're here because we have a common objective. We are working together because we all support Ukraine. And for that, I sincerely thank you. So for the Russian military, things are not going very well. We just saw that Lieutenant General Abachev, who was the deputy commander of the North Grouping, Ukrainian drones caught up with him. Well, the general no longer has legs and has been removed from command. But these drones, that's not a one-off. They're hitting more and more targets inside of Russia, and that has significant consequences. So consider this. According to Russian authorities, last night, they shot down 42 drones across 9 different regions. And those 9 regions, that was a pretty wide spread of area. It's an area that is so large that it's probably not surprising that Russian air defense wasn't able to stop the drones when they first crossed into Russian territory, but only hours later. But this overstretch, the fact that the air defense is not able to do its job, the fact that Russia is struggling to catch up with these drones, that's a very good thing. Because the people in Russia are seeing this. Every day, they realize that their government cannot protect them. And there's another thing that's very good about this. The more they have to pull air defense off the front lines and move it to inside of Russia, it means that the front lines become less defended, which gives Ukraine yet another advantage. This overstretch of the air defense, it is inviting failures. And we see within Russia, there's more and more tension. There's more and more of a desire to not support this war. There's a lot of propaganda that the population is unified in supporting this invasion. But look in the case of Shebekino, that's in Belgorod region, Russia. We've seen now there that the cemetery for the military personnel has been, for the 3rd time, vandalized. This is coming up more and more. But it also exposes a social strain, that there's this narrative that everyone supports the war, But we don't see that. In fact, a recent poll showed that a majority of Russian women said that they would not wait for a partner who is off serving in the military. So though Russia pushes this illusion of a patriotic society, the people don't really seem to feel that way. And in general, I would argue that propaganda, lies, they can carry you for a period of time, but when kinetics catch up, it doesn't help. So a couple days ago, I showed you a video of a supposedly captured American vehicle with US and Russian flags, and it was trucking down the road, allegedly, towards Ukrainian positions. Now, at the time, the Russian news said this was a captured American vehicle. It's now come out that it is, in fact, a Russian Gaz-71, not American. But what happened next? And this is the part the Russian press left off. And it's only come out now. Just a short time later, after that video came out, drones found that vehicle. And you know what? That vehicle is not going to be riding anywhere else anytime soon. But Russia's behind in the drones. And that's something that even their own Russian military bloggers are admitting. They say that they're lagging in developing technologies. They say that they have the capacity to do it, but they can't. The Ukraine is the one that's on the cutting edge. But by the day, we see that Russia is falling further behind. Western drone innovation is simply moving a mile a minute, and the Russians cannot keep up. Russia doesn't have money for everything. Russia's in a very difficult position. In fact, in Russia, the situation is so bad that about a third of the citizens only make $333 a month, of which typically they spend about 2/3 of their money just on food. And it's only now that the government is considering giving them a tax cut. They're already impoverished and they're paying taxes to go for a war. That's incredible. But you would wonder, how will they pay then for this war if they cut taxes on 33% of the population? Well, the Ministry of Finance has a solution. They want to raise taxes to 30% for individuals who they deem to be foreign agents. Essentially, anybody has a view that is opposed to that of the government. Thence, as a foreign agent, they can take more of your assets. So what they really want to do is penalize dissent, but somehow try to make up for these huge holes in their national budget. And part of the reason they probably have huge holes is the amount of corruption. In fact, they just got the former head of Krasnodar Court, which is a region of Russia, the head of the court there, Alexander Chernov. Well, guess what? They confiscated $144 million of bribes that he had taken. That shows you the nature of how things really work inside of Russia. But the Russian people don't speak out. Rarely do they say anything about this. And that is because it is dictatorship. And now it's not going to get better. We've talked about before this messenger system, this MAX, which is now being automatically installed on Russian smartphones. As I said, it records the videos, the audios, the locations, and even the unsent keystrokes. But what's incredible is that analysts say that it's not very well done. It's not very clear how they store this information, but it seems increasingly likely that it could all leak. But to suppress that sort of criticism, to suppress the fact that people are saying, maybe we should do this better, they're trying to, of course, silence dissent. So to suppress this criticism, the Duma, which is the Parliament of Russia's IT committee, its head, Sergei Boyarsky, says that there should be a foreign influence fine on anyone who criticizes Max. So anyone who says that Max is not working very well, it could leak all of our data. Perhaps we should be careful with it. Well, that means you're probably under foreign influence, and that should be investigated by the government. But this is why Russia is a basket case. Instead of worrying about the serious problems it has, it worries about things like this. Somebody criticizing their app. Look at the demographic situation in Russia. We know it's terrible. And the Russians at this point, rather than doing something to, make sure there be more Russians, like not invade their foreign neighbors, they continue to come out with new proposals that are increasingly absurd. So now there is a draft law that's gone to the parliament that would restrict the number of pets that a family can own to the number of children they have. So if you have one cat and one dog, that must mean that you have a minimum of 2 children. That's pretty incredible. That's their solution for how to boost the number of children that are in the Russian population. It's pretty bad, and it's probably not going to get better anytime soon. But we see that the Russian government as a whole, it's coming out with more and more absurd claims, absurd statements of what to do to get past their current situation. Their economy is a mess. The drones are terrifying the population. They're flying all over Russia. They're hitting the oil refineries. They're closing down the airports. They have the population of Russia living in fear. And the upper class, the class that Vladimir Putin actually cares about, the ones who actually make decisions in society, they're not very happy. Vladimir Putin's failed them. Keep in mind, Vladimir Putin's target audience, his base, are specifically those people. The people from the intelligence sector, from the defense sector, and the people from the oligarchy. But they're looking at the situation today and they realize something's not well. Vladimir Putin came to power because he promised to create stability. He promised that there would be security within Russia. But today, it's increasingly looking like anarchy. It's increasingly looking like things are out of control. And nobody's really quite sure what's going to happen next. But when you read the Russian news, you realize that they don't really have much faith that their government has a plan. That perhaps the government is just sort of rolling with it, hoping that things will turn out differently. And that's why Vladimir Putin is increasingly under pressure. Because though he's a dictator, he himself has his own fears. He himself has his own preoccupations, which are different from ours and different from Ukraine's. He has to worry about people trying to overthrow him. And that's something that's realistic. And that's something he should probably very legitimately fear. Because today, he tries to be strong and to project strength. But we see that despite him saying in negotiations that his views have not changed, that Russia would maintain these maximalist gains, the fact is they don't have the capacity to wage that sort of war. So if you're in the oligarchy and you're watching this and you're thinking, listen, yes, this war needs to continue. It's great. I really support it, Vladimir. But they froze tens of billions of dollars of my money. I really need it back. Perhaps it's time we wrap it up. And Putin's not giving you the answer that you want to hear. What would you be willing to do for tens of billions of dollars? And look at the other part of the oligarchy. There are definitely parts of them who make millions of dollars a day due to the military-industrial complex in Russia. They don't really want to see this war end. So we've already got a conflict here. We have people that are losing money and people who are making money. And they don't get along very well because those two different groups tend to break out between those from the military side and those from the FSB side. And the oligarchy as a whole has its alliances within the government, and the government has its alliances to people in the oligarchy. So today, when we see this conflict, this clash, where not everybody can get a piece of the pie, not everybody's going to be happy. Only some benefit if the war ends, while others benefit if the war does not end. There's internal tension in Russia, which is something else that is rarely picked up by the foreign press. The fact is today, for Russia, the situation is not getting better. It's getting less stable. And I think that the increase that you will see, the rise of more judges being arrested, of more people from the military being arrested, more governors and vice governors being arrested, these are all signs of something going wrong. There's something going on inside of Russia that we don't see all of the details, but we see enough details to know that there's something happening. And right now, it's very clear that the FSB is trying to consolidate control, trying to make sure that no matter what happens for the rest of Putin's life and thereafter, that they can maintain control. But the fact is, it's not so sure that they can maintain control. If these new sanctions were to come into effect against Russia, the secondary sanctions that affect countries like India and China that buy Russian oil, that quite literally could collapse the Russian economy. And if the Russian economy collapses, you can be quite certain that Vladimir Putin's days become very limited. Because ultimately, Vladimir Putin does not have allies in Russia. That's a myth. He has a lot of people who have common interests with him, who count on his patronage. But those in the elites who wouldn't be willing to part with him eternally in order to guarantee their own security or to guarantee their own fortunes, that is the elites in Russia. They're not very trustworthy. They are there for themselves. So when we look ahead, Russia ultimately is losing on all fronts. It's losing in every way imaginable. It's losing its senior commanders. It has air defense that's sort of useless and being spread very, very thin. Ukrainian allies are deploying new technologies that Russia just can't keep up with. We see that the refineries are burning. We see that the people in Russia are becoming more and more impoverished. We see that families are having to spend more on taxes and there's less fuel and there's no gasoline in many places across Russia now, including in occupied Crimea. So looking ahead, it does not look good for Vladimir Putin. But there's one thing that should give us all heart and give us something to look forward to. The Putin regime has never been weaker. The end of Putin is yet one day nearer. Thank you for watching. Please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel. And leave your comments below. What do you think comes next? Do you think that we'll see the end of the Putin regime this year? Looking forward to your thoughts. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.